Yep, I went and did it as I said I would, and yeah, it was absolutely quite amazing. I set originally the goal of about £100 to try and raise. I'll have to say thank you to all my friends and family that donated because wow, I didn't expect to get as much as I did. In fact, we got over £300. In fact, the final total was about £355. And to say I only expected to raise about 100, wow. So yeah, thank you everyone who donated. And yeah, as you can see, we've yeah, as close as we can, but we've already had growth, and it's grown back. I'm quite surprised, grown back quite fast. However, that's not what we're here to talk about today. We are, of course, talking more about um, the folly that is Brexit. Because not only are we going to cover the article today in today's New European, today we're just going to have a little aside before we get into our main article. Because many of you may have not heard of a rather large Twitter account called Leave HQ. And during certainly the referendum and post-referendum, it was one of the big places on Twitter where the Brexiteers would constantly bash Remainers, proclaim Project Fear, and say that Brexit was going to be the best thing since sliced bread. Well, right now, or today, in fact, if you go on Twitter, you will find that Project Fear is trending. And one of the big posts that Twitter is showing you is a post from, or a tweet from the Leave HQ, saying that it worries about the future of Brexit because, well, we're not doing too well, and that, the quote, the headbangers are now in charge. These headbangers would be exactly the same ones that you proclaimed were the ones that would get Brexit done, would be the ones that would do Brexit and fulfill all your wildest fantasies and dreams. Well, I have to say that in some certain sectors, it looks like the penny is finally starting to drop. And definitely we'll keep an eye on this story because I'm sure it will become more in focus as the week goes on. But today we're going to go over to the New European, and I think we are in for certainly a lot of this, and it makes a very good case that the Brexiteers are out for revenge. So, obviously from the New European, the title is Forget Building, this government only cares about Brexiteer revenge. The government is being run on a new 3-word slogan: Take Brexit Revenge. What other rational explanation is there for this irrational administration? It is lurching out of coronavirus crisis into hand-picked brawls with the civil service, the media, the EU, and more, displaying all the fighting acumen of a 4th of July reveller who drunkenly blames you for spilling his last order's pint. Brexit has already had a whiff of revenge about it. Whether it's MPs obsessed with Germany's part in the Second World War, or voters in deprived areas to end their own EU subsidies in order to give the metropolitan elites a bloody nose, now the government reeks of it. Mark Sidwell, the UK's top civil servant, is off, supposedly at his own request, although it's hard to square this with months of chatter that Brexiteers viewed him as an obstacle and a blocker. The Prime Minister insists the next civil service head will be impartial, although that's hardly hard to square with briefings to a friendly newspapers that it must be a Brexiteer. Someone from the right-wing blog turns up on TV to blather that people have talked about shaking up the civil service for decades, but when Dominic Cummings does it, it doesn't seem as a nefarious purge. And that it's hard to square with Cummings himself joking last August that disobedient civil servants should be purged after hearing that some were refusing to use the B words in memos. You might have expected older and cooler heads on the government backbenches to protest at the politicalisation of the civil service, but of course the older and cooler heads have rolled, purged in the first pre-election act of vengeance by Cummings and Johnson. John Bercow may have railed against it in the Lords, but in an act of petulant recrimination, he became the first Speaker of the House of Commons in 230 years to not get a peerage upon retirement. The disobedient media outlets, from Newsnight to Good Morning Britain, have been pushing for a supposed Brexit scepticism. With ministerial boycotts, Channel 4 News is a serial offender, and a Tory News spokesperson last year accused its parent broadcaster of conspiring with Jeremy Corbyn to prevent Conservatives in appearing in their infamous climate change leaders debate, so naturally Channel 4's licence is under threat. Tim Dale, the new Director General of the frequently dissenting BBC, might be a former deputy chairman of the Hammersmith and Fulham Conservative Party, but there are fears that the years inside the corporation might have given him Stockholm syndrome. So you'll have to cope with the decriminalising non-payment of the licence fee continuing at least $1 billion over 5 years before it's replaced with a subscription in 2027 if the Tories win again. The end result of journalism that asks difficult questions is now a realisation and recriminations. Of course, the ultimate revenge tragedy is now being played out in face-to-face talks in Brussels, where the Brexiteers' absurd demands for redress after years beneath the yoke of peace and prosperity seems to be leading towards a costly no-deal exit. The classic example of Brexit revenge is Michael Gove's insistence that the ECC red tape that has strangled the life out of his father's fishing firm in the 1970s this week. He tweeted, I was a child in care whose adoptive father ran a business destroyed by the EU. That built on a narrative he introduced during a referendum. When Grove told the BBC, I saw the pride my father and grandfather had in their businesses, and obviously it was very difficult to cope with seeing everything they had built disappear. I was just a schoolboy at the time. I didn't know where I was going to be or what was doing in the future, but it stayed with me. When we see things differently when we are young, and differently still when we are older, but obsessed by ideology, contracted by The Guardian 8 days before the 2016 vote, Ernest Grove said, it wasn't any hardship things or anything like that. I decided to call it a day and just sold up my business and went on to work with someone else. Later, just possibly after a quiet word, Grove Sr. issued a clarifying statement explaining that his business closed as a direct result of Europe. How many more mistakes will be made? How many more clarifying statements will need to be issued? And how many more times will we be embarrassed and driven towards ruin by a government driven by retribution, reprisal, and revenge? And I have to say, it doesn't look good.